Welcome to another episode of the Zelos Podcast, the show that's all about the pros behind the pros. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week, I'm bringing on a buddy of mine, Lee Solomon. He has been a meteorologist on the central coast of California for decades now, and we're going to talk about weather and how it is infused into sports and competitions, kind of a part of sports science that you don't consider all that often. It's going to be a great conversation. Before we get underway, just remember you can always go to my website, rockysnyder.com. We've got a new educational platform. We're launching more online courses this year. We've got several about to roll out, but we do have continuing education on there, in-person events that are coming up in the first quarter of this year. I'll be announcing really soon, including some on the East Coast as well as out here in the Northwest. But just go check out podcast archives, blogs, and a whole bunch more, rockysnyder.com. Here's a word or two from our sponsors, and then we'll get underway. This episode of the Zelos Podcast is sponsored by Kinetic IQ, where intelligence meets motion. Kinetic IQ brings a biomechanics lab into the palm of your hand, letting you measure movement anytime, anywhere, with just an iPad or an iPhone, and no wearables required. I've been using Kinetic IQ's markerless motion capture in my own practice, and whether you're screening athletes, analyzing posture and gait mechanics, optimizing performance, or guiding return to play, it helps practitioners like us save time, capture more objective data, and make instant actionable decisions. So to learn more about how Kinetic IQ is shaping the future of intelligent movement, visit them at kinetikiq.com. That's KINETIKIQ.com. You know, I can't tell you how thrilled I am to have Metabolic Elite be one of the sponsors of the Zelos Podcast. You know what makes Metabolic Elite different is their commitment to real results. I've seen a lot of supplements and performance enhancement things over the years, but they pair clinical experience with innovation, like Lipitab, their proprietary solid-state liposomal delivery system. It's a chewable format which enhances absorption, like nutrients like BPC 157 and synapses. They're delivered more efficiently in the body, supporting recovery, focus, cognitive health. Their formulas go beyond the basics, solving performance health challenges at the system level. Every product is tested for quality, it's backed by research, it's trusted by athletes and clinicians alike. So learn more at metabolicelite.co. And you can get 10% off all of Metabolic Elite products by entering the coupon code ZELOS, Z-E-L-O-S. And before we get underway, be sure to follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder, S-N-Y-D-E-R. Click subscribe, give us some comments, tell a few friends, enjoy the show. All right, so this is going to be a treat this week. We're going to be just chatting with a buddy of mine, but I'm going to consider him an outlier because he is not attached to an NCAA Division I team. He's not attached to a pro sports team, but what he has been attached to, and it's been a passion of mine too, is the weather. He's been the chief meteorologist for 2 stations on the central coast of California here, and we've snowboarded and surfed, and the only thing that we haven't done together yet, but it's just we haven't checked it off the list, is fish together. But we both love fishing. Lee Solomon is going to be here. So Lee, first, welcome to the Zelos Podcast.
Thanks, Rocky. Good to be with you this morning. I'll tell you this first off. I did check the surf early, and it was mostly longboard waves, but I think there might be an option here or there. So after this, maybe,
Exactly. I'm skirting out there right away because we've had all these storms lately.
That's right.
But people right now, they're going, what the heck are we doing with a weatherman on the Zealous Podcast? Well, I think it's one of those things that we always have to contend with, at least the outdoor sports and activities, maybe of the indoors too, for traffic patterns to get to the arena or whatever. But it's an area that I don't think we really put as much importance or understanding or relevance to competitive sports. But I mean, we've got the Winter Olympics coming up. That's huge and weather related. Just so many sports are related to the weather and dependent upon it. So, yeah, we're going to do something different. But first, before we get underway, we're both East Coasters. You're not from New England. I won't hold that against you, especially that you're a New Yorker. Whatever, Yankees suck. But let's just get a little bit more of a career path. How did you get out to Santa Cruz and become a meteorologist?
Okay, yeah, got my degree in atmospheric physics back in New York, like you said, out on Long Island at Stony Brook. And I was a ski and snowboard bum, as many of us were in our 20s, and mine kind of went in even into my 30s. And I got the degree, and I was looking around for a job, and I grew up fishing, came from a fishing family, and I saw this job for marine forecaster out in Sunnyvale, which is in Silicon Valley, for those who don't know, San Jose, basically, area. And I applied for it, and I ended up getting it. The guy I interviewed with said, I came out, and basically all he talked about was going skiing at Squaw Valley. And I said, all right, this is a good place for me, right? And there was surf, obviously. I knew Santa Cruz, so the first thing I did is I ran down and went for a surf and all that. So I said, I feel like I'm home, because I grew up in a beach town back east, and came out here, did that for about a year, routed ships all over the world. We had about 1,500 ships underway, and then decided I wanted to branch out a little bit, and threw out a little demo tape that I made, and ended up landing at KSBW for 22 years, did the weekends, moved to the morning show, ended up getting the chief position, and did that for 22 years. And then more recently moved on to a competitor station that then subsequently got bought by a Bay Area television station. So they ceased doing news locally. And then I've been off for the last couple of months, basically fishing on the East Coast. And I just got back, and, just got 6 feet of snow, and we're getting ready to go snowboarding, you and me.
Yeah, exactly.
This is what we do.
Yeah, it was dumping up there. So, well, that's interesting. I don't know if I knew about the marine forecaster so much. I knew that there was some background there, but 1,500 ships around the world, and you're looking at all these weather patterns.
Yeah, they had some very interesting software. So when you think about a big ship, whether it's an oil tanker, a car carrier coming out of Japan, a big guy that's carrying grain out of Brazil, and all of the routing, you learn a lot of geography for all of these passes that they go through between either islands or land masses, or places they have to go around, like Cape Horn and things like that. You also learn a lot about the currents in the ocean, and you learn a lot about taking these ships on what they call a great circle path. When you fly in an airplane, you do that. And when you do ships, you do a great circle path. As you go north or towards the poles, the distance between 2 points is shorter. So the shortest distance actually is not a straight line across the ocean from point A to point B generally, unless you're right along the equator, then you don't have a lot of choice. But if you're in the northern latitudes, if you go further north, you actually cut off a lot of distance. And depending on the time of year, climatologically speaking, that could be a good or a bad thing, meaning if you're going into the Bering Sea in December, that might be a bad thing, because there might be 40 or 50-foot seas. In that case, you might want to stay south. But one of the interesting parts about that is that even in the wintertime in the Bering Sea, since the jet stream lowers down towards California, you actually can have calmer weather up to the north. And taking these ships through the Bering can at times be a really good path or a really good route for them, believe it or not, based upon where the weather is, because the weather is actually further south at that time towards us versus them. There are still storms up there, but there are some really interesting things you learn along the way. So yeah, 1,500 ships, they're checking in every day through a code, because most of the captains are not English speaking. So you're talking in all kinds of numbers, your fuel consumption, what your speed is in knots, what your seas are, what the winds are, and you're taking all that into consideration. And then you get into tropical season where you got hurricanes and typhoons, whether you're in Australia or out towards the Philippines, or even along the eastern seaboard in the Atlantic. And these ships take days to turn, right? So it's not like a car where you just go, well, there's a detour, we'll go left. Ships could take 2 or 3 days to really change course meaningfully, because they move so slow and they do such a wide path that if they're in tropical evasion service, we need to get to them very early on, or else they just can't turn fast enough to avoid some of these storm systems. And, hurricanes can down ships, they can damage ships, or if you're in the case of, let's say, a cargo or container ship with all the stacked up containers on top, they could get a 40 or 50-foot wave that comes over the bow, rips off these containers at $1 million a piece, and there goes the cargo. So there's a lot to contend with when you're out on the
Sure.
So yeah, that was pretty interesting. That was pretty fun.
So folding that over into the world of sports, like you speak of just massive winds like hurricane force, but wind well, it's often discussed in outdoor sports, especially. What are some common misconceptions coaches and maybe commentators have about like wind direction and speed during games? Do you notice that like when you're watching your favorite NFL team and you're hearing the commentators, you're like, dude, that's not right.
Well, one thing, of course, is the stadium itself, right? How high is the stadium? What is it shaped like? What's the orientation of the stadium to the prevailing wind direction at the time? So that's all going to factor in terms of how much wind you're going to see on the field, right? The other thing that I think that most, and it depends on the time of the game, but if you've got a game that's going, let's say, you got a game at Levi Stadium starting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or three, right, an hour or two before sundown, let's say in November, a football game, and you've got a pretty strong wind going, prevailing what we would call a northwesterly wind here out towards San Francisco and Santa Clara. A lot of times, about an hour after sundown, you will notice that those winds will decrease dramatically because there's something that happens in the atmosphere. We call it decoupling. And that's when sort of the upper level of the atmosphere decouples from the bottom part of the atmosphere where you're on the earth, right? Where you're playing the game. And so those 15 or 20 or 25 mile an hour winds that might be coming in decrease dramatically in those 2 hours. It's not a gradual, oh, the wind's just going to lessen up. They'll go from 25 knots down to 8 knots in a period of 2 hours after the sun goes down, because the heating of the day stops, and that circulation, that rising air, and that motion that kind of does this and drags those stronger winds down stops. So you'll see that the wind will really, really lighten up. And I wonder at times whether coaches are planning for that, or if they're, if it's really, really windy and you're having trouble throwing the ball, or you're not going to kick a field goal because of the distance and the wind direction. And then you're thinking, well, later in the game, we might have a different attack. So maybe we're on the ground more early, and then the passing game opens up later, as opposed to trying to maybe jam the passing game down their throats early to get the run game going. Maybe it's the run first, and then it starts opening up the pass, which becomes an even greater threat when the winds are down later. So I don't know. I'm just thinking about that.
Yeah, no, that's great because, I have had, excuse me, several sports scientists on the show in previous episodes. But when we talk sports science, we're usually talking sleep patterns. We're talking about GPS and and acceleration, deceleration, and a whole bunch of other stuff. We have yet to take in sports science into the weather patterns, the microclimates, and so on. So, no, I think this is pretty cool thing to talk about. Plus, I think I said earlier, I'm a weather geek. I think you actually took the career path that I was interested in doing. It just turned out that, yeah, I was procrastinating by working out in a gym, and I just kind of went with that. But I took paleoclimatology, I took oceanography. There's a whole bunch of the natural sciences that I was just totally geeking out in school. And so very envious as to your path there. But speaking of like microclimates, you already mentioned sports. What other professional sports do you think are most affected by microclimates, whether it's within stadiums, and why do conditions sometimes differ so dramatically from the official forecast? And of course, forecasting is an educated guess, and it's not always accurate, so you can say that. But what's your take on all that?
Well, I would say, I mean, it depends, like, I suppose, on what level of sports. I mean, if we're talking high school sports, of course, they're probably not getting a very specific forecast for their school or for their field per se, right? They're probably getting a more general forecast from the National Weather Service, which might cover a large area, and an area that has a lot of microclimates like California with, you've got an ocean, you've got, sea level at the beach, and then all of a sudden you're going straight up into the mountains, whether it's in Santa Cruz or Santa Barbara, up towards San Francisco. So you've got canyons, you've got areas that will funnel winds, you've got areas that will block winds, you've got areas that will be much warmer because they're blocking a sea breeze. I mean, we could think about Gilroy would be a place like that, where it might be in the upper 60s or 70 around Santa Cruz, or if you're playing at SoCal High or Harbor High or something, it may be a very cool afternoon, versus in Gilroy, it could still be 95 degrees. And I would imagine if you're traveling to or from, the players that are coming from the cooler climate may or may not even know that they're going to go play in 95-degree heat. Maybe there's preparation that needs to happen, more hydration or a different way of eating or a different way of prepping for a game. I would imagine if you're going to go from a coastal climate to a climate that's very, very hot, and not really even get on an airplane, literally get on a bus and drive an hour, and all of a sudden the temperature's 30 degrees warmer. I would imagine even mentally that could play a role. I mean, I grew up playing a lot of sports and lacrosse and all that, and I remember practicing. We'd have to go out in the snow in March because it would still be snowing. So we'd be out, and you'd think about, well, I'm cold right now, but you start moving around, and then you're not cold, and then you stop, and then you get frozen. So I would imagine there's a lot of factors that play into the preparation that athletes do, right, in terms of getting ready for a game, depending on the weather conditions.
Sure. And like part of your news team involves obviously the sportscasters. And so I imagine over the course of a couple of decades here, you've gotten to learn a little bit more of the inside story behind sports teams, whether professional or college or local high school. So with that, like how closely do you feel like pro teams or sports teams actually work with meteorologists behind the scenes, or is it that there's not much they put into it? uh yeah, like I'm wondering. I don't know if there's Major League Baseball teams that actually have a meteorologist on staff, or are they just gleaning information off of AccuWeather or W Underground or whatever?
I'm not totally sure if they do. I bet some might, and some might not. I would imagine if you're heading up to Buffalo and there's lake effect snow in the forecast, they're probably getting an expert on, because they're saying, well, and lake effect snow is one of those things that are pretty narrow. It's not like a big snowstorm where it covers hundreds of miles. It may only be 10 miles wide, a band of snow. So you could be where you're playing the game and it could be completely clear or just cloudy. And then you could move 3 miles and you might be in snow that's falling at an inch or two per hour. So I would imagine they would want a really detailed forecast as to what time does the snow start, what rates are we looking at, in terms of, are we going to still be able to hold on to the ball here? How cold is it when the snow falls? Is it going to freeze up on the balls? I would imagine there's different types of gloves they might have. I think weather's, as you know, really dictates a good part of all sports that happen outdoors, even if you don't realize it. I'm thinking, lately in the last, I'd say 5 years, we've had more calls for more precautions for teams practicing outside, especially the early season football practices in the summertime, because those really start July, August, right? In California, they definitely start in July because they're already in school in August, and it's really, really hot. So they're looking at temperatures on the field. And a lot of times they're just canceling those practices because we've had, heat related illnesses, across the state more than we would ever want, right? We don't even want to have one of those. And then all of a sudden we're starting to see more and more. And that could be just a factor of, in some cases, those 100-degree plus days backing up along each other. So we talk a lot about, in meteorology, the heat index. And the heat index is a measure of how well the body can do under certain conditions, meaning temperature, humidity, wind. So it's really kind of a little, if we could say, the opposite of a wind chill factor. It's kind of like if you're out in the elements and you've got your shorts and your t-shirt on, you can't go any lighter. How are you going to cool yourself off? There's no other way other than sweating, right, to cool yourself off. And we know when it's really, really humid, the body has a much harder time cooling itself off because the moisture, the sweat off of your body is trying to evaporate. That's the process that actually cools you off, evaporate into the air around it. If the air around you is very, very saturated, meaning high humidity, you will not evaporate that moisture off the skin very rapidly. So you always feel wet and sticky in a humid climate. And that's one of the reasons why. If you have 100 degrees in New York and you have 100 degrees in Arizona and you have a light breeze blowing, you'll probably feel much cooler in Arizona than you will in New York because the sweat just will not evaporate off your skin fast enough in New York to cool you down. And then the body starts reacting, right? If it can't cool itself down, then it starts to shut down. And whether that's mental, physical, or combination, I think the decision making and the level of play on the field probably does decline. I don't know if we can measure that, but I would imagine that coaches, if they're not looking at that, probably should be looking at that. Maybe it's a faster rotation of players in and out, kind of like how we would do in hockey, right? With the lines, like you're not out there very long, and you got a lineman out there and he's been out there for, 8 minutes on a drive. Maybe they need to be subbing guys in because maybe the humidity has taken this gentleman's, performance level down maybe 2 or 3 notches, even though he might be the top guy, the top lineman. Maybe it's the second stringer guy that's actually going to perform better because he's been on the sidelines cooling off under the fans. So I think there's a lot of what you call microclimates. I think there's a lot of micro decisions that could be made, adjustments on teams where you might actually get more out of a player that's been resting in a cooling environment, meaning the fans and whatever else on the sidelines versus the player that's been out there because he's the best.
No, no, well said. I know that I'll leave the company's name out of it, but I went and viewed this one. Speaking of wearable tech, a lot of times we're thinking of like GPS units and little things that go on the shoes and or in the helmets or whatever. But the clothing, the apparel, the uniforms that athletes wear is also technologically advanced because this one company has a wind tunnel, but it also can increase the heat up to about 120 degrees inside. It can vary the humidity to 100% or less, and they have robots basically doing these mechanized human movements while wearing this fabric. And this way they can do it for hours and hours without having anybody fatigue or be exposed to those elements, but they can see how the fabric breaks down and advance it so that how this fabric is going to have a better wicking environment or ability to pull moisture from the skin and therefore increase the cooling process, basically speeding up the evaporation off the skin itself. So no, you're spot on. I think that again, I think the weather science, climatology has a tremendous amount to do underneath the surface that no one is really considering, whether it be coaching decisions, play environments. I mean, just the playing fields themselves have changed dramatically because they want to have the fastest, most agile athletes on the field. So
Well, how much hotter does the synthetic field get versus the
there you
grass?
go,
So,
man.
you
That
know,
is hot. I mean, I don't know if anybody else, and the off gassing, I don't know about so much that, but I mean, it is synthetic. And when things heat up, you never know. But I've stood on many artificial fields, and the heat that emanates underneath the soles of my feet, crazy
isn't that
compared to the
wild?
consistent, what is it, 55 degrees subterranean or whatever.
Right. That's right. It has an effect for sure.
What other sports would like off the top of your head, Rattling? I know we got Winter Olympics coming up. What's the extended forecast? I know it's 2 months away, but you can't really you can't really predict it. But I don't know. I couldn't even honestly, man. Where is the Winter Olympics this year?
I think they're in Italy, right?
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're in the Alps. There's obviously different venues. A few years back, and it's obviously more than a few years. I don't remember all of the, there's been so many Olympics we've followed, but I
But
remember when they
Vancouver,
had them. Well, they had them in Korea, in South Korea, right?
yeah,
And they didn't have any snow on the
right.
mountains, so literally it was all artificial, man-made snow. And if you looked around, it was just green. And part of what made that really dangerous is if the athletes went off the course, they were going into rocks and dirt. I remember seeing that. So, the
Sounds
prep,
like how I snowboard.
yeah, we've done that, right? Early season. But yeah, so no, Winter Olympics. Most folks actually probably, if they don't follow ski racing, which I did love when I was younger, they really want the courses to be rock solid. They literally water them down, to kind of simplify it. If they get a lot of snow, it's actually not good, because when you look at the gates coming down a mountain, which is just those little poles, and then you have to go around them, there's something called ruts. So the softer the snow, the more the ruts become. You kind of think like a mountain biking course or something like that. And when the ruts get really, really deep, the course gets really dangerous and really slow. So the harder the snow, meaning literally like ice, the better for them. So they're looking for hard snow. Most of us are looking for powder and soft snow conditions. Racers are looking for really, really hard snow. So a lot of the prep that they do is actually continually to compact the snow, especially if it continues to snow. They want to just get that compression down and get the snow surface really, 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 really hard. Not quite like an ice rink, but not far off.
We're just going to take a quick pause from this conversation to acknowledge our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. The Zelos Podcast is sponsored by Kinetic IQ, where intelligence meets motion. Kinetic IQ brings a biomechanics lab into the palm of your hand, letting you measure movement anytime, anywhere with just an iPad or iPhone. No wearables required. I've been using Kinetic IQ in my own practice, and whether you're screening athletes, optimizing performance, or guiding return to play, it helps practitioners like us save time, capture more objective data, and make instant actionable decisions. So to learn more about how Kinetic IQ is shaping the future of intelligent movement, visit kinetikiq.com. That's KINETIKIQ.com. At the forefront of metabolic elite is Jim Lavelle, internationally recognized clinical pharmacist, a chief science officer at Lifetime, and the co-chair for the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. He's got over 4 decades of experience and has guided Olympic athletes, professional teams, and leading health institutions. You know what makes Metabolic Elite different is their commitment to real results. Like Lipitab, their proprietary solid-state liposomal delivery system. It's a chewable format which enhances absorption like nutrients like BPC 157 and synapses. They're delivered more efficiently in the body, supporting recovery, focus, cognitive health. Their formulas go beyond the basics, solving performance health challenges at the system level. Every product is tested for quality, it's backed by research, it's trusted by athletes and clinicians alike. And you can get 10% off all of Metabolic Elite products by entering the coupon code ZELOS, ZELOS. So I'm thinking also in terms of like competitions in sports, which sports are really in tune with weather patterns? And so I'm thinking like sailing, obviously, mainly water sports, right?
Yeah,
Would you
all
say?
ocean sports, all ocean
Ocean
sports,
sports.
because there's so many more variables. I mean, you and I have probably talked about that. And, whether we call surfing a sport or a lifestyle, whatever it is, it takes a lot of athletic ability and fitness to be in the ocean and, go against Mother Nature. And hey, sometimes the best man or woman doesn't win in terms of, hey, they might be number one, but the waves just don't come during their heat, or they end up being in the wrong spot, or whatever. If you're on a, tennis court, and it's a one-on-one, each player is dealing with the same exact conditions. In the ocean, you could be 40 yards away and the wave could be very, very different from where you are. So the ocean sports, I mean, between the wind, the swell, the current, the tide, and then you even get into the sun and that sort of thing and visibility. We know they can't run Mavericks even if it's perfect 40 feet and the fog is, in a quarter of a mile. It's too dangerous. You can't see the waves coming in. So now you put
Right.
yourself in a position where you're blind, until it's too late. So yeah, the ocean
But
sports huge, huge.
you bring up the big wave surf. So something that's been fascinating me in the last probably I think 5 years is the fact that we have reports of 100-foot rogue waves somewhere out in the mid-Atlantic, Pacific, or Black Sea, or wherever it may be. Technology is advanced in a way where starting to search for these places or search for the waves. Like, have you been getting into that yourself?
I've been watching it from a distance. Obviously, you have a son who surfs
He's
monster,
in, yeah,
you know,
insanity.
yeah, monster waves. I mean, it's almost hard for me to fathom because I remember, he was longboarding 10 years ago and now he's just surfing like 50 footers. But I think we still got him on the snowboard though, a little bit,
Yeah, we do.
which is good. We gotta keep that. Um, but I think what they've been able to do, Rocky, is with the technology and with us being able to measure the ocean surface in more detail, where the waves are, how large the swell is that's being produced from a particular storm, and being able to track it down to almost the hour in terms of the arrival at a certain spot, guys and girls are able to get on an airplane and be there when it's going to happen. In the old days, folks just went to Indo for a month and, you hope to see what you get, or you just travel to an area. You went to Hawaii for the wintertime and you got big waves, but not all the time. But now they could literally sit in their office in Hawaii and then they could fly to Portugal, or they could be in Portugal and go to South Africa and, all of these big wave venues. They're able to just be there when it's on. And it's not just the swell, as we know. We have to have the right tides. The swell could peak in the middle of the night. By the time the sun comes up, the swell's on the fade, and it's not going to be big enough to have a contest. And there's so many things in terms of the timing for swells that make it so difficult to be there. But the technology has come so far with all the satellites up there now that we're able to really dial in these athletes, because that's what they are. I mean, they train for this year round and they get on airplanes and fly around. I mean, this is like the Super Bowl of surfing, right? To be at these places that mere mortals could never even imagine being out at. So yeah, I think that's completely changed. That whole world didn't even exist 15 years ago.
Yeah, sadly, it's changed for my bank account too. So if any listeners want to sponsor an 18-year-old big wave surfer to travel the world like he has this year, please, please, please contact me. I'm happy to get a sponsor his way. Yeah, that brother, he's gone to Chile, Mexico, just got back from Hawaii when that big swell hit Waimea and the outer reef. And of course, he's got Mavericks as his backyard. Yeah, crazy stuff. So all the more reasons for us to watch. In fact, he's really into weather because you have to be with any of those ocean sports, like you say. Um,
Go Jack.
l- yeah, land-based, however, land-based is different. I don't. Yeah, I think. Well, when you have sports like baseball and they're going to put a rain delay on there, uh, or golf, I guess they'll do a rain delay. I can't think of too many other sports, but. Uh, but the more technology advances, I think the more fine-tuned we'll see people understanding that the changing climate actually is affecting not only the competition, but probably the bottom line also. It's when it becomes financially a burden for the sports teams and their owners that they may start to invest a little bit more. Uh, yeah, I
Well, for
wouldn't
the
be
fans,
surprised.
don't forget about. I mean, we can't forget about the fans, right?
The
Because
fans will come no matter what. What do you mean? What do you mean the fans?
well, I've been to games in Denver, when it's 12 degrees, and you go and you've probably been to some games in the rain, but
Yeah.
there's going to be probably a certain small percentage of folks that probably don't end up going, or maybe they don't buy as much stuff. And it's just not as enjoyable an experience, I think, depending on weather conditions. Now, for me, I'm all about playing outdoors, especially when it comes to football, like the dome stadiums and stuff. Not a fan. I understand how incredible they are, and kind of evens everything up. But I love watching the games in the snow, in the rain, the mud. To me, that's football. That's a part of it. Like literally, the weather should be a part of the game. Those perfect, beautiful games. Love that too. But I just love watching a game. Who doesn't like watching, Buffalo and so playing in the snow? On a Thursday.
That's the best.
It's awesome. It's awesome. You know what I mean? And just that whole thing, and they're doing snow angels. I mean, the whole thing is it's a different experience. So I love the outdoor games, and I love that they're affected by weather. I feel like it's almost, it's taken away a little bit of the, I don't know, the classic feel to the game, taking it, and kind of homogenizing it and sanitizing it. And it's
turns it into Hollywood.
Yeah, it's like we don't need it to be perfect. It's football, man. I mean, you're supposed to adjust to the conditions. I mean, that's part of it, right?
Okay, so how can you create a competitive advantage by having more insight in terms of weather forecasting? If you were a coach or a performance expert on a team in any given sport, if you want to pick out a sport necessarily, you go right ahead, but give me an idea.
Well, I think we'll go back to the heat index that I was talking about. I don't think I finished that thought. So let's say you're leading up to a game on Saturday, right? Whatever sport, and you've got really hot conditions the 3 days leading up to the game, and maybe it's going to be just as hot at the game on game day, or maybe it's going to be cooler. I mean, it almost doesn't matter, and I'll tell you why. What we found is, and this study was done with both the weather side, the National Weather Service, and they looked at and they got emergency visits from hospitals with heat-related conditions. So they started to compile data, right? And they took this data. I don't remember how long the study was for. It was many, 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 many years that they've been compiling the data. So they tried to correlate when the temperature is X. Did we see a rise in emergency room visits for heat-related illness, heat stroke, heat exhaustion? That could be somebody running, jogging, that normally jogs every day. They go out and they do 6 miles. But when it was 104, they went out anyway, and they didn't do well. They got sick, right? So they looked at this data, and what they found was on day one, we'll just use 100 degrees as an example, there wasn't a huge uptick. There might have been a few more folks that got a little overwhelmed by the heat. On day two, though, it started to rise significantly. And on day three, if we had a third day of 100-degree heat, it was skyrocketing. The numbers were climbing at a rate that they did not see on day one and day two. And they started to figure out that the body has a tolerance for heat, and it's a cumulative effect. So for a lot of folks that don't have air conditioning, in California, that's a good chunk of the folks that live along the coast. We get a 3-day heat wave. Most of us don't have air conditioning because we generally don't stay that hot for very long. But in a changing climate, we've found that we have more days that are hot, more days over 90, more days over 100. And they tend to not be just one day, but maybe 2 or 3 days in a row. So what happens is it's 100 in the day and only goes down to maybe 75 degrees at night. So now you're warm at night too, and you're not really completely recovering from the heat that you experienced in the daytime. So now you're kind of starting off a little depleted on day two. Then you go out, you perform again, you do your practices, you're out on the field, and the heat's really starting to get to you, but okay, I'm going to get home, I'm going to drink and hydrate, and I'm going to rest. But again, the temperature's still really warm at night, and your body, again, doesn't recover back. And so now you're starting off a little lower on day three, and there just is a threshold for the body at some point where you get to that tipping point, and that day three, and they found that emergency room visits really, really spiked after 2 to 3 days of heat. And that's when it becomes the most dangerous. So when we talk about the heat index, we factor both the nighttime temperature in and the daytime temperature because of the cumulative effect. that it has day after day. And it also is day 2 and day 3. And I think if you have players out, let's say Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday practicing in that kind of heat, and the old mentality would be like, we're going to drive them hard, man, because it's hot and they're going to da 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 da. Honestly, they're probably not recovered on day 4, game day. They're probably in worse shape, believe it or not, than they would have been. It's almost like if you go, how many marathons can you run back to back to back?
Right.
You could train for one, and if you train properly, you're going to run one really well, but you probably can't run one in 2 days after that. So it's just one of those things where how much does it really take out of the body? And I would imagine newer coaches are dialing into that type of stuff, just because they don't want kids dropping on the field. And we also want to win, right? So we want our players to be in peak performance. So I think there is a balancing act that is done with pushing the players really, really hard when the weather conditions are adverse, because you do want to train in the heat and you do want to train in the cold and you do want to train in these conditions. But, do you need to go 3 days in a row? Because is that not detrimental to their physical ability on day 4?
No, that makes complete sense. Heat index. What if you could give me maybe two more elements of weather measurement, perhaps, that have overlying significance to sports and performance? Right, temperature, obviously, the heat index, and maybe the exact opposite, really cold, freezing temperatures, sub-zero temperatures. But it, barometric pressure, should I be concerned with that so
No,
much? No, not
nope,
really.
nope.
That won't have that much effect. Um, Wind chill. How about that? Explain. How about? I don't know if anybody. I don't know if everyone understands what wind chill factor really means. Because we're coming into the dead of winter. We've got those outdoor uh, sports, especially like the Olympics. But I'm thinking football, and we got the wind up in Lambeau Field, and they're telling me that the wind chill factor is -17. What are they talking about?
They're taking the temperature, just the ambient air temperature, and let's say it's 20, and they're factoring in the amount of wind. The direction doesn't matter as long as the wind's blowing on you. It's just the magnitude of the wind, meaning the strength of the wind. So there's a chart that you could follow along, but we'll just say, for argument's sake, it's 20 degrees and the wind's blowing at 15 miles an hour. That might give you a wind chill of 5. And you go, okay, what does that mean? It means that if you have exposed skin, it's going to feel like 5 degrees on your skin. And that means that when you're outside and you go, well, it's not that cold out because I got a coat on and I got my long johns on, but you don't have your ears covered. Maybe you got a baseball cap on instead of a beanie, and you don't have gloves on, and all of a sudden the tips of your ears and the tips of your fingers are starting to go numb. And that's part of what that wind chill factor will do, because the wind is taking the heat away from your body a lot faster than the body can replace it, especially when it's really, really cold. You don't get a wind chill factor. I think the cutoff is about 35 or 30 degrees. So right in that zone. You start going into the 40s, there's not that much of a wind chill factor. It doesn't really drop the temperature as much. It's when you start to get much colder when you really see those numbers drop off. And that's why they do have a chart for that. So, I mean, I noticed that when I was back east in December. I was, cleaning up some fishing gear in the truck, and normally I'm not there that late. And all of a sudden I'm going through stuff and my hands are starting to get numb. And I'm going, well, I'm going to need gloves to continue this. Right. But the rest of my body was fine. You got to remember that the core, right? All the heat goes into your core, protects your main organs. That's how the body kind of shuts down. And that's why people lose fingers and toes when they're on Everest or climbing a mountain and they get frostbite. It's always on the extremities because the body is drawing all that warm blood and putting it right around your major organs. Because if your heart stops or you stop breathing, you're pretty much dead, right? You can make it without a couple of fingers or toes. So I think there's that. And you got to wonder how much energy does that zap? You see it all the time, right? When the quarterbacks come off, they're bundled up because it's that cold out, even though they're running around, now they're sweating, right? Now it's even worse, right? So, if you're wet and you blow a wind over you, you get out of the lake even on a summer day and the wind's blowing, you get a chill for a second. You get goosebumps, and that's what's going to happen when it's cold out and the wind's blowing. So that wind can do a lot of things.
Sure.
It can make you colder. Sometimes that's good because it cools you off in the summer, but a lot of times in the wintertime, it's your enemy.
Okay, I think one more question in regards to this is that uh, one of the websites I typically go to is windy.com because windy gives me different elevations of wind all the way up to the jet stream beyond, and then down at surface level, gives me surface water temperature, it gives me swell direction, it gives me precipitation, everything. I'm like, that is one of my most fun websites to go to when it comes to forecasting and understanding. But then I'm thinking back that, oh, I remember when we were getting faxes, like wave fax. That would
Yeah,
be the
yeah.
surf forecast like this. But now here we are 20, 30 years later, and there's so much advances in technology. Like where do you see it going even further? Because now it's like real data. I think along with this line, when we think of like hurricane season, we see all these different tracking models, these different forecasting models, the European model or whatever. There's all these different colored tracks if you're watching any weather map. Like, where is technology taking us to fine tune your forecasting ability?
This is one of the most exciting things, Rocky. So let's just do it. We'll just do a quick recap of where we were, let's say, in the last 10 years, because there's been tremendous advancements. A big part of that were the newer satellites that they launched some years ago. And we don't have to get into all that, but they launched many, many more satellites, weather satellites that are orbiting the globe. We have observations hundreds of times from what we used to have. So we're getting a better picture of what's happening right now around the globe. That's really important, because if you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going, right? And there's still a lot of error in that. And that's part of why forecasts aren't perfect, because we're starting off with what we call initial conditions that aren't exactly right. I won't get into the specifics of why, but we're not starting off with exactly what's going on in the atmosphere, but we're getting closer. Then we started to have many, many different weather models. They're all based on physics, these equations, right? And these equations have been around a long time. Computer power started to advance. So let's just say before we could take 3 equations and put them into a computer and get a forecast. Now we could put 1,000, because the computing power. Now we could have done 1,000 10 years ago, but you would have gotten the forecast a month from now. So getting the forecast next month for what happened yesterday is probably not very helpful. So having the higher powered computers allows us to take more variables in, like your wind, maybe in a smaller area, microclimate, something like that. We can start to compute all of those equations. Now, what's happening now is we've almost gotten to the point where we really can't put any more equations into the computers. Even though the computers are fantastic, we're kind of at the limit of what their limit is in terms of computing power. So we've gone over to AI. And I know that's a wild term that everybody throws around. We know Chat GPT or whatever, you put something in and it spits something out. AI, to me, was invented by us in our brains. All AI is doing is looking back at past experiences for this initial set of conditions in the atmosphere and going, what happened last year? What happened 5 years ago? I've seen this type of storm before. What ended up happening? Did we get 40 inches of rain? Did we get 100 inches of snow? Did it go to the north? Did it go to the south? So AI computing in weather is now looking at all of the possible scenarios that could happen without actually doing the computations, the physics. So it doesn't need as much computing power to do that. So the benefit of that is we could run, like you said before, many different models, many different times. We could do this kind of spaghetti plot, and we could look at a general consensus. If we ran this thing 1,000 times and 900 times it came out with one solution, we might be pretty confident that that's probably where we're going to end up, because 900 out of 1,000 runs came to this. Now, there were some outliers, maybe, right? Sometimes maybe it's not that clear, but that's an advantage that AI has in weather, because it can compute the way it computes much, much faster than we can do it with the physics models. what's happening now is we're kind of taking the AI models because they're running those, and there has been some advancements in the tracks of hurricanes. It actually outperformed the physics model last year during hurricane season. That was really great. It's still a lot of experimenting with this because every once in a while it's going to tell you that it's going to snow down in Lahaina, right? On Hawaii on July 4th. Well, we know that's not going to happen. So AI is not perfect, but we are melding AI technology with the physics model. So now we have models that are using a little bit of both. That's kind of the cutting edge. And we're trying to find a balance of, we still need the physics, but the physics are really hard to compute for the computers and it takes a long time. So let's use some AI and see if we can have some kind of, just, a smorgasbord or whatever of models that can kind of come up with different solutions. So it's really an incredible time to be a forecaster because, it gets to the point where it's not only 3 models, it might be 12 now we're looking at the 4 physics models, and then we're looking at 3 AI models of the same type. And then we're looking at something that might be a combination, and we're seeing what it's coming up with. And that's awesome. So this is, in the next 10 years, I think forecasting is going to be improving incredibly, both on the error side. And part of the real world examples of what they're doing, this is kind of inside baseball here. Down in the Southeast, and again, this is experimental. This is not for the public to digest, but AI is taking tornado tracks, potential tornado tracks. Let's say we have a line of tornadoes that are forming in the Southeast somewhere in Tennessee or Mississippi. And we're looking at these severe thunderstorms and we're wondering which one is most likely to spawn a tornado and where would that thunderstorm be at that time. So we could warn a community, not 4 minutes ahead of time. How about 15 minutes ahead of time? So you can get your kid out of school, you can get to the basement or whatever you need to do. And they've shown some skill at being able to extrapolate from where these storms are, let's say at 10 in the morning to where they might be at 10:30 and where the tornadoes might pop up. It's not an exact science, but that's kind of where AI may really save lives because the warning time on tornadoes is the most significant thing that we can do in terms of saving people. Because if you're in a mall and it gets hit and you have no warning or you got 30 seconds, you're in an unfamiliar environment. You don't know where the safe space is. And there may not be a great safe space in a big box store. So if you had 15 minutes, though, you might be able to get into the interior part of that building, or maybe you can actually get into the car and move away from that area. So those types of things with AI and forecasting, I can only imagine how it could be related to sports and forecasting winds and exactly when winds would die off and exactly when the rain would start and how heavy it would be and what the visibility would be and what the temperatures are either going to go up to or down to throughout the game and what that might mean for the players' clothing and how they might change from half to half. I would think there's a lot of implications there, especially because the AI computing power can dial in something so quickly. So you can get maybe a 15-minute forecast in the side of a game that's only an hour. You could get 15-minute windows of changes in conditions.
I knew you would fold this all together. I knew it. Fantastic. Oh, Lee, this has been great. So
Cool,
I know you're off on different adventures and more will be revealed later, but if people want to follow your trails, how do they do that?
They could get onto my Facebook page, look up Lee Solomon Meteorologist or Lee Solomon Weather. You could do that on YouTube. You could do that on Instagram. We will be launching something much larger in about 4 to 6 months or so. And that will include things like 24-hour weather, detailed weather forecasts for microclimates in our area here in Central California. And it will allow the user, meaning the customer, to have a forecast that's really detailed and focused on their activity, their sport, their location. So I think that's going to be a huge, huge boost in a time when so much of the news and the weather is talking about national stuff. What we really want to know is what's going on for me on my kid's game or at the game I'm going to or at the game I'm playing in or the surf or the snow or my run, or, is it going to rain on my mountain bike ride? Is it going to be muddy? I think we can now drill down and give people that kind of information. It just hasn't been out there in a concise way So people are splintered in terms of where they're finding it. And we're going to change that so that there's going to be one spot you can go to and dial in what you want and what you need versus an app that's just going to tell you, well, it's going to be, 70 degrees today and partly cloudy. I mean, that doesn't really give you a lot of information. And if you're really using that to go outdoors and do something, if you just drive into the supermarket, that's probably good enough. But if you do what we do and all the different types of sports we do and all the professionals that play sports, I think having more information is helpful to have the most fun and to be the best at what you're doing.
Well, I think the Giants, the Niners, and the Quakes are probably going to be calling you pretty shortly then.
Let's
That's
hope so.
fantastic. Man, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate your time and your
Anytime, Rock.
friendship and look forward to our next adventures.
This afternoon, brother.
Yeah. And boom, just like that, drop the mic. It's over. What a great conversation. I don't know about you, but I've always been a weather geek, and anytime I can talk how things fold into one another, especially obscurely, and you don't consider it, it just sends the point home to me a little bit more. Keeping your eyes open and really asking why things are the way they are. Just a good kind of mantra for me, I guess. Let's hear it one more time from our sponsors, and you guys just go out there and make it a good one. Remember to check out metabolicelite.co. Check out all the products they have on their website. Synapsin Pro is something I've been using to help stay focused without having to over-caffeinate myself. It keeps me in the zone so I can just really hone in on the things I need to achieve without feeling like, man, I gotta reach for an energy drink every 5 minutes. Metabolicelite.co. And don't forget, Kinetic IQ. They've got markerless motion capture for morons like me. I can use their product with my iPhone or my iPad. I can look at posture analysis, movement analysis of any exercise, gait analysis. It gives me everything I could possibly want when tracking people's movements. So, check out kineticiq.com.